What's up everybody, it's Tuna. So this is the second build that I wanted to showcase for the League, and it's something that I've been working on for a few days. Essentially, it started out as an idea of how can I possibly run blue altars and take as much physical damage mitigation reduction as possible, while also taking minus cold and lightning resistance, and at the same time also being able to do the lead mechanic and mechanics like harvest and expedition. So because of that, there are a lot of monsters within the lead mechanic that also overwhelm your armor. And on top of the physical damage reduction that you get from altars, there's absolutely no way to actually tank those monsters if you're investing heavily into armor. So my next idea was essentially, so what can I do to actually mitigate that damage and stay alive? And what can I do also to, nullify the fact that I'm getting negative resistance? The natural sort of progression that I had was to go to the Mahuxotl Machination Shield. This is a very interesting shield in that it allows you to do a combination of things that is only possible with the shield itself. And I will just quickly explain the mechanics and try to make you guys understand what it does. If we press Alt on the item, we can see here that it gives us Corrupted Soul. What Corrupted Soul does is that 50% of non-damage taken bypasses Energy Shield, and we gain 50% of maximum life as extra energy shield. Now this in itself doesn't really do anything. It's just here as sort of a way to sort of give you energy shield, which would make sense later as we read on to the rest of the item. Divine Flesh is one of the biggest things that we needed on the shield, and it's like the most important thing basically. But what it does is it gives us 50% of elemental damage taken as chaos damage. Essentially that's all of our elemental damage that we take is shifted onto our chaos resistance, and to sort of buff us then we get 5 maximum chaos resistance. So that's a lot of mitigation that we get for half of the damage we take, and that's really, really cool. The next keystone is Eternal Youth. So Eternal Youth gives us 50% less regeneration rate and 50% less total life recovery rate from energy shield leech. But what happens is that our energy shield recharge instead applies to life. This is sort of a way to nullify the downsides of Vault Pact, which is also another keystone that we get on this, which doubles the leech that we are actually doing per second, but it also makes us have no life regeneration. So essentially what happens is, for example, you're taking damage, in this case from Blood Rage, right? And if I was to then, cease the damage from happening, after a few seconds, you just regen back to full. Because, yeah, that's essentially what that keystone does. Next, we get Everlasting Sacrifice. This is also a really strong part about the shield. Basically what happens is that when we leech energy shield to full, in our case 773 energy shield, we gain 5% to maximum all resistances for 4 seconds. That means that the faster we fill up our energy shield, essentially the more uptime that we get on this +5 maximum to all resistances, which is insane considering our build is now mitigating all of our damage from both chaos and from fire, right? And so +5 to all means also +5 to chaos, of course. Next, Immortal Ambition. So essentially you have 0 energy shield recharge and whatnot, and you lose 5% of energy shield per second. But you're getting overleech, so your life effects are not removed on full life. Essentially, just like Slayer, you're getting overleech, and then when your life is full, you also regenerate energy shield. So you're basically leeching life until you get to full life, and once you get to full life, you're leeching energy shield. And that's sort of what enables Everlasting Sacrifice. So all of these keystones together have like sort of weird synergies with each other that allow you to create this sort of playstyle where you are not actually getting any sort of mitigation from your energy shield, but you are incentivized to leech energy shield as much as possible so that it gets to full, so that you get 5% damage reduction, and you're also, gaining the benefits of overleech from that. But the main things to take from this is Divine Shield, because you're getting 50% of elemental damage taken as chaos. So now that we have Divine Shield, what can we do for the rest of the damage, right? So we have to think that like, to be more efficient about our mitigation, how can we shift the remainder 50% to something else, right? And what we do is we grab this keystone here, Tempered by War. What Tempered by War does is it takes 50% of cold and lightning damage, and it shifts that to fire. So what this enables is it enables us to basically not have to worry at all about cold and lightning resistances. And that also negates the downside of it, of course, which is 50% less cold resistance, 50% less lightning resistance. Essentially, what ends up happening is that you are then, on top of that, able to use something like a Purity of Fire, which not only does it give you percent fire resistance, but it also gives you maximum fire resistance, further mitigating the damage that you take. And what that ends up looking like is something like this. We have 81 fire resistance, negative cold and negative lightning, and 85 chaos resistance. So we're taking all of this, you're putting so much effort into getting such high resistances, and putting all of the sort of damage that we take onto our fire and chaos resistance. But what can we do for physical damage, right? And that's where the tricky part comes in. There are very few ways of actually shifting damage, but those ways have actually been buffed recently. So this is sort of what enables this playstyle. And the primary form that we're doing that is through the Cloak of Flame, which is going to take 40% of all physical damage you take as fire damage. So that's 40% mitigation that we're already getting from that. The next way that I'm going to take it is 8% of physical damage from hits as fire here. And we also take 8% from the implicit as chaos damage. So that's already a ton of chaos damage and a ton of phys damage that is then shifted onto our resistances. And then we can further get an extra 15% through the Lethal Pride that is also going to have Tempered by War, of course. So make sure you are looking into that. So that is the Rakita Keystone. You can see that I have 5% there, I have 5% there, and I also have 5% there. So that's 15% extra. So what happens is now I now have 80% of physical damage taken as both fire and chaos damage from all of these items, right? So I am taking now all of that physical damage and putting it onto fire res. What can I do to further reduce the damage I take? And that it is, of course, going to be done by the Ruby Flask. So the Ruby Flask is now making us take 20% less fire damage. And that is going to be, of course, amplified as well by Pathfinder and also by additional nodes such as Spike Concoction. We're taking less damage now to fire resistance, which is basically, remember that we are taking pretty much only chaos and fire res. But we mitigate further, like 20% here, amplified by our flask effect. And then on top of that, we are also using Arctic Armor. So what Arctic Armor allows us to do is that when we're stationary, we're taking 20% less fire damage from hits, as well as 20% less physical damage from hits. And because we are playing Lightning Strike, we're basically stationary all the time when we attack. So that allows us to sort of have a playstyle where if you want to tank something, you can just stand still, hit the ground, and you're basically like taking a ton less damage because of that. So that is the basic fundamentals of how the build works, how it interacts with the shield. And on top of all of those things, we want to have evasion as much as possible, of course, so that we are not actually getting overwhelmed by the amount of hits coming in, and we have time to recover in between them. So essentially, we want to get as much evasion as possible, and we do that by getting evasion bases, grace, and that kind of stuff. So that is the basic fundamentals of the build and how you are mitigating all the incoming damage. And then if you do have, of course, additional funds, you can take the Progenesis Flask, which takes 25% of all incoming hit damage, and it staggers it over 4 seconds, which if you have a build with high recovery, such as this one, it is completely mitigated, thanks to, for example, like life gain on hit from these nodes and leech, of course. So I have been rambling now for a little while, but that pretty much explains the basic mechanics of the build. And yeah, so now I want to explain why, of course, we want to go Pathfinder. So Pathfinder, of course, has the capabilities of proliferating your poisons, as well as giving you 20% more damage to those poisons, which is an insane amount of damage, as well as an insane amount of clear. So the way proliferation works is it's multiplicative with pack size. Essentially, what you should imagine is, imagine you have a pack of 10 monsters next to one rare. So you hit them all, they all take damage, they all have 1 poison on them. What happens then is that those 19 poisons get transferred onto the 1 rare. Essentially, it's a way to nuke large targets within packs, and it's a way to sort of like really smooth out your clear. It's honestly fantastic, and it's completely, I think, the strongest node out of all ascendancies in the game. Next is Nature's Reprisal, which is just a way for us to inflict Withered. Since we hit so much, we are able to actually inflict 15 Wither stacks quite easily, and to quickly ramp that, we have the Withering Step, of course, that we want to hit when we're next to the target. Then we have Nature's Adrenaline. This allows us to actually have, you know, better flask uptime. You can have, you know, close to 90% flask uptime, which is what I have about here. You can go for 100% if you wish, of course, but I feel like, you know, when you're hitting things and when you're also like mapping, it's going to be completely fine to have it around 90%. Keep in mind that the best the best explicits for this would be, you know, increased charge recovery or reduced charges per use. So those are the best. Increased charge recovery is the best one, but it's quite expensive to get like a set of these, and also to roll them is really difficult. So yeah. Then Nature's Boon will give us 30% increased effect of flasks, so that means that all of these things are going to be further amplified by that. And yeah, that is essentially what we do, and we stack that, of course, with a little bit of additional flask charges gained, Master Alchemist, and Brute for Potency there, of course. So next I want to talk about the itemization and what allows us to actually be a poison build. So that is the Pneumatic Dagger. So the Pneumatic Dagger is very unique in that it has an implicit that says all damage from hits from this weapon can poison. So essentially what that does is it allows you to actually craft this as if it was an elemental weapon. What we do is we use an essence, we craft that until we have a T1 flat damage roll, and then we use cannot roll attack modifiers to slam on chaos damage over time, and that is a guarantee. Then we will essentially just lock this the prefixes, use a Veiled Chaos Orb, and we want to get chaos damage over time, or attack speed, or anything of the sort. You know, accuracy would be better as well, and we just craft attack speed. This league is insane in that you can actually get stupid trees on here, and you can see that I have global damage, attack speed, a little bit of intelligence, and increased explicit speed modifiers. So that is what is going to allow us to poison. And the cool thing about that is that since we are pretty much all elemental damage based, is we can scale that with things like elemental damage with attacks or any sort of flat elemental damage on our jewelry or our abyss jewels or any of that sort of stuff. So for the gloves, we use the snake bites. The reason we go for the snake bites is because it's basically the best gloves for poisons, and it's basically the only way to be able to get a curse on hit on gloves reliably. So you can probably go for like any other glove that you like, any unique gloves or even rare gloves, but you really want to have temporal chains on hit. The temporal chains, it's not reliant on levels at all. So a level 1 temporal chains will give you as much poison duration as a level 20, essentially giving you the same amount of damage. The only thing you do lose is the defense, of course, that you get from it. It's slowing down monsters and that kind of stuff. So yeah, and for the second curse that we use, we want to go for a mark on hit, and we are using, as you can see here, Poacher's Mark. Poacher's Mark gives us additional flat damage, and it also gives us life gained when we hit them. The thing about Poacher's Mark is that it is by no means the best curse, but it is necessary because it is really the only way for us to reliably sustain frenzy charges on single target. You could also go for an alternative quality Blood Rage on top of that, you know, to get an additional percent. But basically, because of Poacher's Mark, we're then enabled to use Mark the Prey, which is also in the radius of our Lethal Pride. And Mark the Prey makes enemies take increased damage and also gives them less accuracy. So yeah, that makes enemies gonna have a harder time hitting you, especially it's really good on bosses, right? And on top of our evasion, you know, it's gonna make it really hard for them to actually hit us. And then it also has some damage there. And of course, the mastery is what gives us the 10% chance to gain a frenzy charge when you hit a marked enemy. So that is how we sustain frenzy charges on single target. For the helmet, it's really important to get the 8% physical damage from hits taken as chaos from the implicit, and temporal chains curse effect, of course, because that's going to give you the most amount of damage. We want to only get on the suffixes is suppression, chaos res, and fire resistance. So you don't have to get too much fire resistance because we use purity of fire. But you have to have capped chaos resistance, you know, beyond 80%, because that's what's gonna, you know, basically enable you to mitigate all the damage. You by no means ever want to use the shield if you do not have capped chaos res, so keep that in mind. We want to have chaos res there. On the boots, we will go for action speed and avoid elemental ailments. These don't have to be actually upgraded, you know. Action speed would be nice to get up to 5%, but you can choose lesser essences here and it's completely fine. Of course, the suffixes, again, we want to go for avoid elemental ailments. This is done with a loathing essence. This is so when in combination with the implicit, we're getting over 50%. We want over 50% because we do use the Ancestral Vision jewel. What that does is it takes 50% 50% of our spell suppression, and it makes that into void ailments basically. And it's also quite cheap in comparison to Storm Cloud. So that is how we are avoiding ailments. We're capping our suppression, chaos res, and fire resistance through our rares. We can cap our accuracy on our jewels, as well as, you know, some of the attribute requirements, extra resistances, life, things like that. For our amulet, we can use the Eternal Struggle. Eternal Struggle, you want to have the Searing Exarch as the dominant influence here. That is because we want to have the benefits of 15% Culling Strike. So on top of that, Eternal Struggle also gives you increased global defenses and some of the stats that you need to equip your gems and that kind of stuff. This is essentially just a very nice quality of life amulet. But the main important thing here is the Vengeance Cascade. So Vengeance Cascade is actually a 50% more multiplier for a Lightning Strike in this situation, because you're able to hit an additional time with returning projectiles from our additional strike. That's actually giving us an insane amount of damage, and it's making our ramp actually much faster from poisons. So you will feel a substantial amount of damage increase in single target because of this, as well as clear, since you'll be running around. You know, if you ever drop Val Lightning Strike and you run around, you'll see them actually all try to go back to you. So you can just basically run and you have a Val Lightning Strike and you'll just have all these Lightning Strikes following you around. It's pretty cool. So for the belt is sort of one of the slots that we can get. Flash duration, it's really nice to be able to get like a decent amount of that. You can also craft it on the bench. You can also have flash reduced flash charges used, or flask effect. You know, you really want to get a high life roll here with percentage life if possible from Hunter. Because, you know, as you can see, that this build is actually quite low on life, but it is packed with mitigation, so it totally makes up for that. It's just very difficult to actually get a ton of life on the tree and on our gear because of the uniques that we use having not much life. But one thing to note is that because the Cloak of Flame has no life roll on it, we can actually make use of the Life Mastery here. That's giving us 15% maximum life. When there are no life modifiers on the body armor, keep that in mind. That is an extra 15% that we get from that, and it's really nice for you know, chests such as this one, this league. So now let's have a quick look at the path of building. So as you can see here, in the more sort of budget version, we are not actually using an impossible escape to go up to this. Instead, we are going to be using an Anathema Moonstone ring. What this ring does is it sets our curse limit to our maximum power charges, which, since we don't get any additional power charges, this is going to set our curse limit to 3. You want to actually look for a corruption with a corruption implicit. In this case, I chose Grace, but you can look for anything else yourself there. So yeah, this is going to allow us to actually have an additional curse. So that is going to be the temporal chains from our gloves, the mark from, you know, our mark on hit there, Poacher's Mark. And then on top of that, we are going to be using Despair, and that is going to be self-cast on single target only. You have plenty of damage without it. You will never need to cast this outside of single target. So keep that in mind. It's not something that you'll have to worry about too much, aside for on very tanky targets. And that has like a very high duration of 12 seconds. So you'll basically only want to cast it like maybe once or twice per fight. That will be up the entire time. Since the Progenesis Flask is actually quite expensive, you might have to actually swap something out if you cannot afford it. So in this case, what I recommend is that to go for an Elixir of the Unbroken Circle. This is a very underrated flask. It does give a little bit of ward, but the primary thing that it gives you is gives you endurance charges for every second that it is active. So essentially what this will do is, if we slot it here into the Progenesis, and we can actually enable our endurance charges now. So we have that. And what that does is it's going to feed our Immortal Call. So Immortal Call gives you additional damage reduction when it consumes endurance charges, sorry. And on top of that, it's going to last longer, of course. So this is going to help you mitigate burst damage. So anytime you take damage and it goes beyond a certain amount, Immortal Call is going to proc. It's going to last for a few seconds, and it's going to consume your endurance charges provided by the Elixir. And yeah, because of that, you want to you know, make sure that this is on, it's not using the Instilling Orb when full. Rather, you want to have that used at the end of the effect. So yeah, essentially, this is going to be able to feed your Immortal Call, and whenever that procs, you'll gain additional physical damage and elemental damage reduction. But Progenesis, as you can see from you know, the mitigation, is going to give you a substantial boost in both physical and elemental damage mitigation, as well as chaos damage mitigation. The Watcher's Eye is also very important, because the Watcher's Eye is going to provide us further physical damage taken hit as fire. So because of the Watcher's Eye, you know, we get to a total of 80% with the rest of our gear, essentially making it so that we take very little damage from physical damage, and also because of the Arctic armor, we mitigate the physical damage we take, which is then mitigated as well further down by our resistances and things like that. And what that results in is basically being able to tank anything that is within reason, and it makes it a very smooth mapper. It is able to take on all of the altar modifiers as well as the uber bosses and, you know, the normal bosses, of course, as well as hopefully deeper delves, which is something that I am trying to venture onto now. And yeah, that pretty much sums up the mechanics of the build, how it functions, and I will be doing sort of like updates on the build, on the POBs, as I further you know, improve the gear, and as I further discover things about the build and things that I can improve. Of course, you know, any tips, or if you have anything in mind about the build or any questions, do ask in the comments below, or come by the stream. I'd be happy to answer anything that you're wondering, or you know, if you have any improvements or suggestions, then I am more than welcome to answer that. Yeah, make sure to check out the path of building in the description, and thank you so much for watching the video. I hope this was helpful. I hope you do find this build as something that you'd like to reroll into, and if you do reroll into it, I hope you enjoy it. I have really been loving the build. It's so much fun, and I hope you find that fun too. Thank you for watching, everybody. Have a good night. I appreciate you all. Goodbye.